sides. The Rocky Mountains stood over Coldwater Creek the way they had stood over everything for 10,000 years. And a letter in his coat pocket he had read too many times.
Then the stage door opened one more time. The platform went quiet.
Eli Morrow had not slept well in 7 years, and he had stopped expecting to. He stood at the edge of the platform at Coldwater Creek Stage Depot with his hat pulled low and his arms crossed, in the particular stillness of a man who has learned that movement does not always mean progress. The October sky above the Rockies was the color of a bruise going yellow at the edges, and the wind came off the high peaks with the smell of coming snow, and the stage was 40 yards out and closing fast. He had the agency letter in his coat pocket. He had read it so many times in the past 6 weeks that the folds had gone soft, the paper thinning at the creases, the way things do when you handle them too much. He was not a man who handled things too much. He did not know what that said about the letter. The letter said her name was Clara Vane. It said she was the daughter of a frontier physician. It said she was experienced in livestock care, accustomed to remote conditions, practical and without family obligations requiring return. It said she was suited to hard work and harder winters. It did not say what she looked like because Eli had specifically deliberately not asked. He was a man who had learned to be careful about certain things, and the way a woman looked was one of them. He was already regretting that particular caution. Behind him, Coldwater Creek went about its Thursday morning business. Winifred Calder was sweeping the porch of her general store with the aggressive efficiency of a woman who used a broom the way other people used opinions. Denny Greer was leaning against the livery wall with his thumbs in his belt loops and the expression of a man who had nowhere to be and considered that an achievement. 3 ranchers from the South Valley stood in a loose cluster near the depot door, not talking much the way men stand when they are waiting for something to happen and are not sure they want it to. The stage rolled in trailing dust and creaking leather, and the particular sound of horses that have been pushed hard and know the journey is almost done. 2 drummers came off first, moving fast, already scanning the street for the hotel. Then a cattle buyer from Denver in a coat that cost more than Eli's monthly feed bill, who stepped down and immediately began talking to someone he recognized. Then an older couple who had clearly made this journey before and knew exactly where they were going. Then the door opened one more time. Eli felt it before he fully processed what he was seeing. A shift in the air, a change in the quality of attention on the platform, the way every head turned by a degree or two without anyone deciding to turn it. He watched the men around him, and he watched the way every calculation happening behind every pair of eyes adjusted itself, and he understood with cold certainty that he had made a significant error when he had chosen not to ask about appearances. Clara Vane stepped down from the stage and set her bag on the platform beside her and straightened up and looked at Coldwater Creek, the way a person looks at 100 towns they have already survived without surprise and without disappointment and without any particular need to be impressed. She was wearing a gray traveling coat, well-made and well-worn. Her hair was pinned beneath a practical felt hat, dark brown against the pale October light. She carried her own bag, and she did not look around for someone to take it from her. None of that was what stopped the platform. What stopped the platform was the way she stood, the particular quality of her stillness, the way she occupied the space she was in, as though she had thought carefully about where she was going to put herself and had decided this was exactly the right place. Denny Greer's voice cut across the platform before Eli had finished processing any of it. "Eli Morrow," he called out loud enough for the whole street to hear, grinning the grin of a man delivering a joke he has been saving for the right moment. "You ordered a plow horse and they sent you a thoroughbred." The platform went quiet in a different way than it had been quiet before. Eli watched Clara Vane's face. He was watching for embarrassment for the small contraction of a person who has just been made the subject of public commentary she did not invite. What he saw instead was something older and colder than embarrassment. The expression of someone hearing a joke they have heard 500 times and are done pretending is funny. She did not look at Denny Greer, she looked at Eli. "If you have something useful to contribute to this conversation," she said, her voice carrying to the platform without any visible effort, addressing Denny without turning her head. "I am listening. If you don't, Then we are done here. Dead silence on the platform. Winifred Calder materialized at Eli's left elbow. He had not heard her cross the street, which meant she had moved with purpose and speed that her usual deliberate manner did not suggest she possessed. "She is going to be the most significant complication of your life," Winifred said quietly, not looking at him. Eli did not answer because he was watching Clara Vane pick up her bag and look at him with the direct measuring attention of someone taking inventory of something they need to make a decision about. And he was busy recognizing the expression because it was the same expression he used when he was doing the same thing. He crossed the platform in 6 steps and stopped in front of her. "Miss Vane," he said. "Mr. Morrow." Her voice was steady and a register lower than he had expected. "The agency described you well. I would have known you regardless." He glanced at the bag in her hand. "There's a trunk on the stage, the smaller one with the leather straps." He retrieved the trunk from the top of the coach, loaded both pieces into the wagon bed, and came around to find her already seated on the bench, with her hat in her lap and her hands folded, and her eyes on the mountains to the west, which were going gold at the caps where the first real snow of the season had settled. He climbed up, took the reins, and pulled the wagon out of Coldwater Creek with the whole street watching, and not a word between them until the buildings fell away behind them, and the road opened into open range, and the mountains filled the western horizon like a fact nobody had asked for, but nobody could argue with. "I need to say something before we go further," Eli said. "Then say it." He kept his eyes on the trail. He had rehearsed this part, the practical accounting of what she was coming to the small house, and the hard winters, and the single hired hand who quit every November without fail and returned every March as though nothing had happened. He had decided to be honest about all of it because he was a man who had learned that honesty offered early cost less than honesty offered late. "I wrote the agency asking for someone suited to ranch labor. Hard winters, isolation, no comforts worth speaking of. What I have is 800 acres of house with 2 rooms cattle that need constant attention and a neighbor who will want to mind my business from the moment you arrive." He paused. "I want to make sure you understand what you agreed to come to." Clara turned her head and looked at him with the same level of attention she had used on the platform. "Are you telling me the work is different from what was described? Or are you telling me you have doubts about whether I can do it?" "I am telling you what you are walking into. I do not know you well enough to have doubts about your capabilities." "No," she agreed, "you don't." The wagon creaked. The wind moved through the sage, carrying the particular dry cold of a Colorado October. Eli waited for her to say something else, and when she did not, he looked at her sidelong and found her watching the mountains again. "Your file said your father was a physician," he said. "He was. I worked with him from the time I was 12 until he passed. 30 years of frontier medicine between us." She said it without sentiment, not cold, just honest the way people are honest when a fact is simply a fact and does not require decoration. "He died of fever 3 years ago." "I'm sorry." "Thank you." A pause. "He was a good physician and a good man. I learned everything he knew, which is relevant to your situation if you will let it be." Eli frowned. "How so?" "Your nearest doctor is in Coldwater Creek. I noticed his office on the way through. According to the stage driver, he spends 6 months of every year in Ohio visiting family." She turned to look at him with the directness he was already learning to expect. "Ranching is physical work. Accidents happen, infections happen. If something goes wrong 20 miles from town, you are not waiting 6 hours for medical care. I can provide that care. I have my father's medical bag and 10 years of practical experience with everything from broken bones to infected wounds to difficult livestock deliveries." She held his gaze. "I want to be clear about what I bring to this arrangement from the beginning. Not because I am proud of it, but because I have learned at some cost that people who do not understand your value will always underestimate what they are asking you to give." Eli looked at the road. "You talk a fair amount," he said. "When there is something worth saying, the rest of the time I am quiet. A beat. You will find that out." "I imagine I will." Another silence different from the first one, less sharp at the edges. They were 2 miles from the ranch when Clara said, The agency file I reviewed before accepting this placement included county land records. Eli's hands tightened on the reins before he could stop them, and the horses felt it and shifted. Those records noted 2 boundary inquiry filings against your property in the past 18 months, she continued. Both were dismissed on procedural grounds, but the legal language in both filings is identical, word for word. She paused. That is not a coincidence, Mr. Morrow. That is a template. Someone who does this regularly. The cold that lived in Eli's chest, the one that had taken up residence 18 months ago with the first letter from the Denver attorneys and had not left since, expanded slightly. Where exactly did you read county records? He said. The agency provides background documentation on properties candidates are being sent to. Most women do not read them carefully. She turned and looked at him with the level of attention he was beginning to recognize as her default. I read everything carefully. Eli drove for a moment without speaking. He had told no one the full shape of what he suspected. He had told no one because he did not have proof, and because men like Duncan Hargrove depended on your silence, counted on the particular isolation that came from believing you were the only one being pressed, and that speaking about it would only confirm your weakness. You read a land filing, Eli said, and decided to come anyway. I read a land filing and decided the situation required someone useful. She turned back to the mountains. I told you in my letter I was not looking for an easy life. I meant that precisely. The ranch came into view around the last bend in the road as the afternoon sun started dropping behind the Rockies, long shadows stretching across the snow-dusted range, the barn dark red against the pale grass, the house small and square, and plainly the home of a man who had stopped caring about appearances some years back and had made his peace with that. Eli watched Clara's face as the ranch appeared. She leaned forward slightly on the bench, not reaching, not smiling, just looking at the land with the focused attention of a person taking a true measure of something they intend to stay with. The horses in the south paddock, she said. Breeding stock. The gray mare is favoring her right front. You can see it in the way she is distributing weight. That has been developing for at least 2 days based on the compensating stance of her hindquarters. That is not a momentary adjustment. That is a pattern. Eli looked. She was right. He had been on the north fence line all week and had not done a proper check of the paddock. He did not say anything. Also, Clara said, your water trough near the barn has a crack on the east side. You can see the discoloration in the soil beneath it where water has been seeping. Another week it will empty overnight and you will not understand why until morning. Eli pulled the wagon to a stop in the yard and sat there for a moment, in the particular silence of a man recalibrating something he had thought he understood. How did you see all that from a moving wagon? He said. My father taught me to look at everything, she said. He believed that a physician who only examined what he was called to examine missed half the information available to him. She climbed down from the bench without waiting for his hand. It is the same principle, regardless of what you are looking at. She walked to the door and pushed it open and stepped inside without pause, the way you step into a place you have already decided about. Where do I sleep? She said. He told her. 1 bedroom. He would take the barn. She turned from the doorway and looked at him with an expression that was not quite impatience and not quite amusement, and was mostly something practical. You will do no such thing. It is October in Colorado. She looked at the main room with its rough table and its iron stove and its single window facing the mountains. Build a partition, hang a blanket, set up a cot in the main room. I do not care which. What I care about is whether there is work to be done before dark. There was always work before dark. He had expected complaints about the house. He had stood in the same doorway 7 years ago and watched Margaret survey the same room and say quietly and finally that she could not live like this. He had heard those words so many times in the years since that they had become a kind of background noise in his own skull, playing on a frequency just below attention constant and unignorable. Margaret had not been wrong about herself. She had been wrong to come in the first place, and he had been wrong to think that wanting something was the same as being suited for it. Clara Vane looked at his house like she was calculating what it needed, not mourning what it lacked. The gray mare first, she said, pulling her coat off and hanging it on the hook beside the door, with the easy familiarity of someone who had made a decision about where things belonged and was not revisiting it. Then the water trough. Then we can discuss what needs doing and in what order. They worked until dark. She ran her hands down the gray mare's right foreleg with the unhurried thoroughness of someone who had done this 1,000 times. The horse stood for it in a way horses stand when they sense competence in the hands touching them. "Stone bruise," Clara said. "Not serious yet, but it will be if she keeps working on it. 3 days off and cold compresses on the hoof morning and evening." Did she have access to rocky ground recently? She may have stepped wrong in the paddock. I have not had time to check the ground up there. I will check it tomorrow. She stood and stepped back, giving the mare room. I will look at her again in 2 days. If the bruising has spread, we will need to reconsider the timeline. Eli watched her move back along the fence line in the last light of the afternoon. Her movements economical and certain, and felt something shift in him that he did not have a name for and did not reach for one. He was a man who had spent 7 years being careful about exactly this kind of shift, and he recognized the danger of it the way you recognize a weak spot in the ice, not by feeling it give, but by knowing the conditions that create it. He set the feeling aside. He did not kill it because he was learning already that some things did not kill cleanly. He set it aside and went to work on the trough. They fixed it in the cold of early evening, working by the light of a lantern hung from the barn eave. When the repair required holding the iron brace in place while he hammered, she held it without being asked and without adjusting and without letting go until he told her it was done. When one of the fence posts near the barn gate needed resetting, she was already testing the post down the line before he had finished the first one. She had a system. It was not his system. It was he was beginning to understand a better system than his. Dinner was beans and cornbread and the last of the preserved venison he had put up in September. He cooked it because he always cooked, because he was not sure what else to do, because the act of feeding something was one of the things he understood clearly and without complication. She sat at the rough table and ate with the appetite of someone who had been traveling all day and understood that food was fuel, and asked him about his winter feed supply and his cattle count and the condition of the north pasture. She produced a small notebook from her coat pocket and wrote things down while he talked, and he found this strange for about 3 minutes and then stopped finding it strange. "You keep records of everything," he said. "How else do you know what you have?" She looked up from the notebook. "How do you track expenditures currently?" "In my head." She looked at him for a moment. Not judgment, diagnosis. "That works up to a certain complexity," she said. "Past that point, it begins costing you money you do not know you are losing. I will set up a ledger this week." "I did not ask you to do that." "I know." She went back to her notes with the equanimity of a woman who has long since stopped requiring permission for things she has already decided are necessary. "I am going to do it anyway because it will help us both. If that bothers you, say so now." It did not bother him. He said so before he had finished deciding to. After dinner, he hung a blanket down the center of the bedroom doorway using 2 nails and a length of rope, and they said goodnight with 4 feet of wool between them. He lay on his side of the room in the dark and listened to the Colorado wind come off the mountains and thought about a woman who had been on his property for 6 hours and had already identified the mare's bruise, found the trough crack, started a bookkeeping system, and told him things about his own land that he had been looking at for 1.5 years without seeing. He thought about Margaret and about the hook beside his door and about Clara Vane hanging her coat on it as though she had done it 100 times before and intended to do it 100 times more. He did not sleep for a long time, but when sleep came, it came without the usual edges. He was up before her for the first time. He had the stove going and the coffee ready and was standing at the window with his cup when she came out of the bedroom already dressed, her hair pinned her notebook in her coat pocket. She looked at the coffee and then at him with the slight adjustment of a person recalibrating an expectation. "You're up," she said. "Ranch doesn't wait," he said, but that was not the full truth of it, and he suspected she knew that. She poured her coffee and sat at the table and opened the map again, the one she had covered in pencil marks the morning before. She had added to it in some manner he could not account for the marginal notations denser, now the annotations more specific. "I want to talk about Hargrove's pattern," she said. "All right. He has been working this valley for 18 months. In that time, your property has received 2 boundary filing inquiries, but he is not only working your property. She turned the map so he could see the marks she had made along the western edge, small notations in a careful column. The Beckett Ranch to your south had an unexplained purchase offer last spring. The Beaumont property 3 miles east lost 12 head of cattle in August that they attributed to mountain cats. The Garrett place, the furthest north, had fence trouble in the spring that no one could explain. I asked Cress Dunbar about the neighboring operations yesterday evening while you were checking the cattle before dinner. Eli looked at her. You asked Cress. He was there and he knew things. Yes. She did not look apologetic. Every incident on a different property. Never the same place twice in sequence. Always separated by enough time that each family assumes they are simply having bad luck. Eli looked at the map and at her careful marginal notations and felt the thing he had been carrying alone for 18 months shift in his chest. Not lighten, shift, change shape into something he could see clearly for the first time. He's rotating, Eli said. He is rotating deliberately and carefully. The effect is that every family in this valley believes they are facing their own private difficulty. None of them know they are facing the same man. She looked at him steadily. That is not an accident. That is the architecture of the plan. The isolation is not a side effect. It is the mechanism. Without it, none of the rest of it works. Eli set down his cup. He thought about 18 months of fence checks and sleepless nights, and the low, constant pressure of the Denver attorney's letters, with their polite language and their patient implication that what he had built could be taken apart without anyone raising a voice. He had told no one the full shape of it because he had believed there was no shape to tell. Just pressure, just inconvenience, just the grinding patience of a man with money waiting for a man without it to run out of endurance. But it had a shape. Clara had put the shape on the map in pencil before he had finished his first cup of coffee. We need to talk to Harlan Beckett, he said. Yes, today if possible. She folded the map along its original creases with the careful movements of someone who respects the utility of a thing. But carefully. We ask questions and we listen. We do not share details that could travel back to Hargrove through loose talk. Let him tell his own story first. Eli nodded. He knew Harlan Beckett. Harlan was not a man who talked without reason, but he was also not a man who missed things, and Eli had the sense that Harlan had been sitting on something for a while and had simply had no one to say it to. They rode to the Beckett Ranch by mid-morning, the trail winding south through open range that had gone pale gold with the late season, the mountains to the west holding their new snow against a sky that was the particular hard blue of a Colorado autumn day that has decided to be beautiful despite everything. Harlan Beckett came to his door with the careful attention of a man who has been working alone long enough that unexpected visitors require assessment before welcome. He was in his mid-50s, lean and weathered in the way of men who have done hard work in difficult conditions for long enough that their faces have stopped pretending otherwise. He looked at Eli, then at Clara, and made the quiet recalibration that people made when Clara appeared somewhere they had not expected her. Eli, he said. He looked at Clara. You're the woman from the stage. Clara Vane, she said. People are apparently discussing me. People in this town discuss everything. Harlan's expression was not unfriendly. Come inside. What followed was one of the more important hours Eli had spent in 7 years, and he understood that even while it was happening. What he understood less in the moment was how much of its importance came from watching Clara listen. She did not lead. She did not direct. She asked one question at a time. Simple questions, the kind that give a man room to tell his story in the order it lives in him, which is never chronological and rarely logical, but is always honest. She wrote in her notebook without looking down at it, which meant she was watching Harlan's face, while she recorded what he said, and Harlan, who was a man accustomed to being half listened to, responded to being fully listened to the way most people do. He talked. He talked about the purchase offer that had arrived in April with the letterhead of a Denver land company he had never heard of. About the language of the offer, which had been respectful and reasonable, and had somehow made him feel cornered in a way he could not articulate. About the fence trouble the following month, 3 posts on his northwest corner pulled clean out of the ground in a way that weather alone did not explain. About 12 head he had lost in August, which he had blamed on cats because he had no other explanation that made sense. By the end of it, he had the look of a man who had been carrying a heavy thing for a long time and had just set it down for the first time. Clara turned the notebook so he could see the timeline she had built while he talked. She did not explain it. She let him read it and come to his own conclusion, which he did in the particular silence of a man arriving somewhere he has been walking toward without knowing it. "It is not just me," Harlan said. It was not a question. "It is not just you," Clara confirmed. "It is you and Mr. Morrow and the Beaumont property and the Garrett Ranch and likely others we have not spoken with yet. Every incident on a rotation. Every family isolated. Every family believing they are the only one." Harlan stared at the page for a long moment. Then he looked at Clara. "The purchase offer," she said. "Do you still have the letter?" "Somewhere." "Find it. I need to see the specific language it uses." Harlan found the letter in a box under his kitchen table. Clara read it standing up, holding it with both hands, and Eli watched her eyes move across the page with the focused precision of someone reading a map for a route they need to travel. "It matches," she said. She did not say it with satisfaction. She said it the way you say something that confirms what you feared when you were still hoping to be wrong. She looked at Harlan. "I want you to ride to the Beaumont place this week. Talk to the brothers there. Ask them what they have experienced and let them talk first. Do not share details about what you know. Do not mention Hargrove by name until they do. Just listen." Harlan looked at her for a moment. "You're asking me to be careful about what I say. I'm asking you to understand that Hargrove has been working this valley for 18 months, specifically because no one in it has talked to anyone else. The moment we begin coordinating, we change the shape of what he is able to do, but only if the coordination stays contained until we are ready." Harlan Beckett, who had spent 30 years making decisions about difficult things on his own, looked at this woman who had been in Colorado for 4 days and nodded once. "I can do that," he said. They rode home in the early afternoon, the trail along the creek opening up enough for them to travel side by side, the water low and dark between the cottonwoods that had gone yellow all the way to their tips. "You knew he needed to tell it his own way," Eli said. "People always do." She kept her eyes on the trail. When someone has been frightened and isolated for a long time, what they need before anything else is to feel that they are not alone in it and not foolish for having missed it. Harlan Beckett is not a foolish man. He was simply operating with incomplete information. Once he saw the complete picture, he did not need to be persuaded of anything. Eli rode for a moment with that. "The man you were engaged to," he said, "Warren Ashby. When you found out what he was doing, who did you tell first?" Clara was quiet for the length of 2 bends in the trail. "No one," she said. "For 3 weeks, I did not tell anyone. I told myself I needed more information, that I needed to be certain. But the truth was that I was afraid of being wrong in public and afraid of being right about the man I had agreed to marry, and both fears pulled in the same direction." She paused. "By the time I went to the county attorney's office, I had more documentation than any reasonable person could dispute. I had made certain of that specifically because I understood I would not be given a second opportunity to be heard." "Did it help being certain before you spoke?" "It helped with the case." She looked at him sidelong. "It cost me 3 weeks the family in Jefferson County did not have." Eli absorbed that. He looked at the trail ahead and thought about 18 months of fence checks and early mornings, and the particular stubborn silence he had maintained because he had believed that silence was discipline rather than what it actually was, which was fear wearing a more respectable coat. "I should have spoken sooner," he said. "You did not know what you were looking at. I knew enough to be afraid of it." "Yes," she said, "but fear by itself does not tell you where to go. It just tells you something is there." A pause. "Now you know where to go." They were half a mile from the ranch when Eli saw Cress Dunbar waiting at the gate. Cress was not a man who made social calls. He was the kind of neighbor who appeared when something required appearing for, and his expression as Eli rode up confirmed that this was one of those times. "Got a visitor this morning," Cress said. "Duncan Hargrove himself, not his lawyers. Came to my place first, asked if I knew your situation. Asked if I would be interested in a cooperative arrangement with a mining company looking to develop water access in the valley." He paused and looked at the dirt, then back up. "I told him I was not interested. He smiled and said he understood and that he was sure things would work out one way or another. Cress pulled a folded paper from his coat. Then this came out of the county office this afternoon. A man came in first thing this morning and filed a formal surveyor's report claiming a boundary discrepancy on your land. Filed at 8:15. He held the paper out to Eli, before any of us were awake and thinking. Eli took the paper. He read it once standing in his own yard with the mountains going dark to the west and the evening cold coming on. He read it again. The language was identical to what Clara had described from the Missouri filings. Precise, templated, the specific vocabulary of a man who had done this before and saw no reason to reinvent what already worked. He handed it to Clara without a word. She read it standing in the fading light, holding it with both hands, and he watched her face. Her expression did not change, but he had learned in 4 days to look past her expression to the small signals beneath it, the slight tightening along her jaw, the particular quality of stillness that meant she was moving fast inside while she held the surface quiet. He had this ready, she said. He was waiting for a moment to file it. The surveyor 2 days ago was the final piece he needed. The field report provides the documentary foundation for the petition. She looked up. He is asking for judicial review of your original land claim. The hearing will be scheduled within 60 days. 60 days, Eli said. If we do not respond with counter-documentation before then, the review proceeds without opposition. She folded the paper carefully and held it out to him. We need a land attorney, not from Coldwater Creek, from Colorado Springs at minimum, someone outside Hargrove's immediate network of influence. Eli took the paper. He held it for a moment without looking at it. I cannot afford a Denver attorney, he said. You cannot afford to lose your northern water access either. Clara held his gaze with a directness that no longer startled him. I know what you have in reserve. I have been running the numbers since the first evening. It is enough to retain competent counsel, but only if we move now and only if the case is tight enough to resolve before the reserves are exhausted. She paused. The case can be tight enough, but only if we build it correctly from the beginning. Cress had been listening with the patient attention of a man who processes information carefully before he responds to it. The other ranches in this valley, he said, looking at Clara. You are thinking Hargrove is working all of them. I know he is, she said. We spent this morning at the Beckett Ranch. Harlan confirmed a purchase approach and fence trouble that fit the pattern exactly. His place to your east lost cattle in August under circumstances that do not add up. The Garrett Ranch had fence cuts in the spring. Every family thinking they are alone. That is not accident. That is strategy. Cress looked at Eli with the expression of a man recalibrating something. She always talked this way, he said. She has been here 4 days, Eli said. Yes, said Cress in the tone of a man who understood that this was both an answer and not entirely an answer. He turned back to Clara. I will ride out to the Beaumont place tomorrow. Talk to the brothers. Do not tell them everything yet, Clara said. Do not give them details that could reach Hargrove through someone who talks without meaning to. Just ask what they have experienced and listen. Give them room to tell it. I have been listening to ranchers talk for 30 years, Cress said. I know, she said. That is why I am asking you. Cress almost smiled. He put his hat back on and looked at Eli with the expression he used when he had made a decision about something and was not revisiting it. He rode out without another word. They stood in the yard as the dark came on the mountains going black against a sky still pale in the west, the first stars appearing in the east above the high ridgeline. Eli looked at the folded paper in his hand. I need you to understand something, he said. Clara waited. I have been watching this come for 18 months, and I have been losing ground slowly without making noise about it because I thought silence was the same as strength, and because I did not know the shape of what I was fighting. He kept his eyes on the paper. I do not know how to do what you are doing, the thinking 3 steps ahead, knowing the legal language, walking into Cobb's office and making a man remember his own job. He looked at her. I do not have that. I never have. I know, she said, not dismissal, not comfort, just honest acknowledgement of a fact. Then why are you still here? The question came out quieter than he had intended. It was the real question, the one that had been building since she had stepped off the stage and looked at Coldwater Creek like she had already decided something. What you walked into, what you could see was coming. You saw it before I did, and you came here anyway. Clara looked at him for a long moment. The wind moved between them, carrying the smell of snow building somewhere behind the mountains. Because I spent 8 months in St. Louis watching a man I trusted use the law as a weapon against people who did not know how to fight back, she said. And I spent 3 years after that learning how to fight back specifically so that the next time I saw it happening, I would be able to do something other than document it too late. She held his gaze without wavering. This is the next time, and I am not going to watch it happen to you and to the people in this valley when I have spent 3 years preparing for exactly this. A pause. And you asked for plain and practical and someone without complications, she said. What you actually need is someone who knows the precise shape of the trouble you are in. Those are not always the same requirement. Eli looked at her in the early dark of a Colorado evening and felt something give way in him that had been holding a long time. Not collapse, not surrender. Something more like a door opening that had been sealed shut, and the air coming through it was cold, but it was also fresh, and he had forgotten what fresh air felt like. He did not say anything. He was not there yet with the words, but he did not look away either. It was at 2 a.m. that the fence went down. He heard the cattle before anything else, that particular sound of a herd in displaced motion, not panic but wrong, moving in the dark, in a way that did not belong to this hour. He was dressed and out the door in under a minute. Claire was right behind him without his having to say anything, already pulling her coat on, already moving. They rode the north line by lantern light following the sound. The cold cutting through everything, the snow on the ground going blue-white in the lamplight. They found the break a quarter mile up. Wire cut clean and clean again at 6 points. Post pulled straight out of the frozen ground, the holes still clean-edged in the frost. A gap wide enough to drive a wagon through. Tracks in the snow. 4 horses moving fast, heading north without any effort to conceal the direction. 30 head gone. Eli stood at the break with his lantern held up and his free hand in a fist. And the particular quality of rage that comes from watching something you have built being dismantled by someone who believes you cannot afford to protect it. He looked north toward the darkness above the ridge where Hargrove's range began. "Don't," Clara said behind him. He did not turn around. He knew what she was going to say. He knew she was going to be right about it, which was its own particular difficulty. "They are up there," he said. "I know exactly where they are." "Yes." Her voice dropped to the register it used when the situation required everything she had. "And if you ride onto Hargrove's land in the dark with a rifle and 3 miles of rage, his men put you in the ground, and his lawyers call it trespass and defense, and everything we have built in 4 days ends with you." She stepped forward until she was beside him. "I know what this feels like. I know the specific feeling of watching something be taken and knowing exactly who took it and not being able to move directly at them. I know what it costs to stand still." Eli stood in the snow. He looked at the gap in his fence and the tracks going north and the darkness above the ridge. He thought about Noah, about the morning he had stood in a different place on the same land with the same quality of rage, and nowhere to put it, the fever having taken what it was going to take, regardless of anything Eli Morrow did or did not do, and the particular education of that experience, which was that some things could not be addressed directly, and that learning to act within that constraint was not defeat, but something harder than defeat to accept. He breathed. "Then what do we do?" he said. "First light, we go to Cobb with the tracks and the compass documentation and the timeline. We add this to the record we already have." She turned to face him, and her face in the lantern light was serious and without flinching. "And then we go get your cattle back the way that actually makes Hargrove pay for them. In a courtroom, in front of a territorial judge, in a record that follows him and his company for the rest of their operational existence." "That takes time," Eli said. "I do not have the cattle. I do not have the operating reserve I had yesterday." "I know what you have," she said. "I know what you do not. I have been running the numbers since the first evening." She met his eyes directly in the cold dark. "Trust me." Eli looked at her. At this woman who had been on his land for 4 days and was standing in his snow in the middle of the night with a lantern speaking about his resources and his legal situation and his future with the settled authority of someone who had decided she was invested in the outcome and was not revisiting that decision. "All right," he said. They rode back to the house, and Eli spent the remaining hours before dawn repairing what he could of the fence by lantern light, working alone in the cold with the mechanical focus of a man who needs to do something with his hands. When the sky began to lighten in the east, he came in and found Clara at the table. She had been working through the night, and the table in front of her held 12 pages of notes organized into a timeline that covered every documented incident across the 5 ranches, cross-referenced by date and type and location, and the specific pattern of how they related to each other. She looked up when he came in. Her eyes were tired, but her face was not. "It is complete," she said. "Everything we have documented and everything Harlan Beckett provided. If Cobb writes it into his record today, we have a foundation that a territorial judge cannot dismiss." Eli looked at the pages. He looked at the woman who had produced them through the night while he hammered fence posts in the cold. "How long have you been awake?" he said. "That is not a useful question right now," she said. He poured her coffee and sat across from her, and for a moment neither of them spoke. The stove ticked. Outside, the dawn was coming up pale and cold, and the mountains were beginning to define themselves against the sky. "When this is over," Eli said. He stopped. Clara waited. He was close to something he did not have the words for yet, something that had been building since she had hung her coat on his hook on the first morning and looked at his house like she was calculating what it needed. He filed it away with the care of a man who has learned not to waste things. "When this is over," he said, "I want to talk about some things." Clara looked at him with the dark eyes that took inventory of everything and said nothing she did not intend. "All right," she said. They went to Cobb's office as the town was waking up before Hargrove's men had time to move the cattle or his lawyers had time to prepare a counter-narrative. Clara laid the full timeline on Cobb's desk. 12 pages, dates, locations, compass readings, descriptions, pattern analysis. Cobb read it all. It took 20 minutes. When he finished, he looked up at Eli. 18 months, Eli said. "You have watched this happen for 18 months. Today you do your job." Cobb looked at the pages. He looked at Clara. "The tracks," he said. "You documented them." "At 2:15 this morning," Clara said. "By lantern and compass against a fixed fence post. I can place the lead rider's horse at 23 yards north of the breakpoint based on the stride pattern in the snow." Cobb was quiet for a long moment that had the quality of a man having an argument with himself that he already knew the outcome of. "If I ride out to Hargrove's range looking for those cattle," he said slowly, "and they are there, this becomes something I cannot take back." "It already is something you cannot take back," Clara said, and her voice was quieter then, but no less direct. "Hargrove made it that 18 months ago. You do not have to start anything, Sheriff. You only have to respond to what he already started." Alton Cobb picked up his hat from the desk and looked at it for a moment. Then he put it on. "I will need deputies," he said. "Cress Dunbar will ride with you," Eli said, "and Roy Sutton and me." Cobb looked at Clara. She held his gaze without offering to make the decision easier. "And me," she said, "because if this reaches a territorial court, you want the person who built that case present and available to testify. And because I know what a Hargrove trap looks like before you ride into it." Cobb looked at Eli one more time. Eli gave him a single nod. The sheriff walked out the door ahead of them, and Eli followed, and the morning air hit cold and clear and full of what was coming, and Eli Morrow walked into it without looking back. They rode out 5 strong into a morning that had gone hard and bright, the overnight snow compressing under the horses into something that held the cold. The way stone holds cold, releasing it upward in a constant press against anything warm enough to feel it. Eli rode at the front with Cobb beside him and Clara on his right, and Cress Dunbar and Roy Sutton behind, and the trail north unrolled ahead of them through open range that was beautiful in the particular indifferent way of country that does not care what happens to the people moving across it. Roy Sutton had appeared at the ranch at dawn without being summoned, his rifle across his saddle, and his face carrying the expression of a man who had made a decision in the night and was done revisiting it. He had looked at Clara when he arrived and said nothing for a moment, and then said, "Tell me what you need from me." That was all. Clara had told him, and he had nodded, and he had not asked further questions. Harlan Beckett met them at Eli's north fence line with two of his ranch hands, and the expression on his face when he saw the cut wire and the pulled posts was the expression of a man recognizing something he had been working very hard to convince himself was not real. "Same tool," Clara said, crouching at the nearest cut with the focused attention she brought to everything she examined. She ran her finger along the cut edge of the wire without touching the center of it. "Same compression pattern at the breakpoint. Consistent with the previous two cuts on this property and the fence damage documented at the Beckett Ranch in May." She looked up at Cobb. "I want that in your record." "It is in my record," Cobb said, and he was writing in his own ledger as he said it, which meant something had changed in him since yesterday morning. Some internal argument had resolved in a direction that cost him something, and that he had accepted the cost of. They followed the tracks north for 2 hours. The trail was clear in the packed snow, 30 head of cattle driven at a pace that suggested confidence rather than urgency. 4 riders who had not worried about being followed because they had not expected to be followed by anyone who knew how to respond correctly. That was the first thing that bothered Eli. The second thing was the silence when they crested the ridge above Hargrove's northern pasture and looked down at what was waiting. The cattle were there. All 30 head penned in a makeshift enclosure beside a line shack that was too new and too solidly constructed to be anything other than deliberate. 2 men stood at the enclosure gate. 50 yards north of them, at the entrance to a narrow canyon that opened onto Hargrove's main range, 3 riders sat their horses with the patient stillness of people who had been expecting company and had prepared for a specific kind of it. Crest pulled up beside Eli and looked at the layout below without speaking for a moment. "They knew we would come," he said. "Yes," Clara said. She was already scanning the terrain with the methodical attention of someone building a picture rather than simply seeing one. "They knew we would come, and they planned for us to come the way they expected us to come." She looked at the 3 riders at the canyon mouth, then at the 2 at the enclosure, then at the shack, then at the single trail down the ridge that was the obvious road of approach. "They want us to ride it down that trail as a group. Hargrove's lawyers will argue that we entered his property aggressively, that his men acted in defense of a lawful operation, that any confrontation was initiated by the party in the wrong." She did not take her eyes off the landscape below. "This entire scene has been arranged to produce a specific legal outcome if we respond to it directly." Sheriff Cobb studied the layout. His jaw was working in the way of a man doing arithmetic he does not enjoy. "Then what do we do with it?" Cobb said. "You ride down alone." Clara turned to look at the sheriff with a direct calm that Eli had learned was not indifference, but its precise opposite, the steadiness of a person who has thought something through completely and is not frightened by what they found. "Badge visible, no weapon drawn. You identify yourself. You state that you are investigating a theft report with documented evidence. You request access to inspect the brands on the cattle in that enclosure. You do it step by step entirely within your legal authority with 4 witnesses watching from this ridge." Cobb looked at her. "If they allow you through," Clara continued, "you document every brand against Eli's registry and you record the names of every man present. If they refuse to allow a law officer access to investigate a documented theft, that refusal is itself a criminal act committed in front of witnesses." She paused. "Either outcome gives us what we need. Either outcome is worse for Hargrove than he planned for when he arranged this scene. And if they do not stop at refusal," Cobb said flatly. "They will," Clara said. "Hargrove is meticulous. Every action he has taken in this valley for 18 months has been calibrated to remain inside a boundary of legal defensibility. Shooting a county sheriff in front of 5 witnesses is not inside that boundary. He will not allow it." She held Cobb's gaze. "He does not think you will do this. He has been counting on you not doing this for 18 months. That is the assumption we are correcting today." Cobb was quiet for a long moment. Below them, the 3 riders at the canyon mouth sat motionless, watching the ridge with the patience of men who believed they knew how this would unfold. Eli looked at Cobb. "You know your job, Alton," he said. It was all he said. The sheriff looked at him. Then he looked at the layout below one more time, and something settled in his face. The specific quality of resolution that comes when a man stops arguing with what he already knows is right. He rode down the ridge alone, his badge catching the cold morning light, his hands visible, his pace deliberate. The four of them on the ridge watched without speaking. Roy Sutton had his rifle across his saddle, but his hands were not on it. Crest was perfectly still. Clara sat with her hands flat on the saddle horn and her eyes on the proceedings below, still in the way of someone who has learned that stillness is its own form of readiness. The men at the canyon mouth did not move as Cobb approached. The guards at the enclosure watched him come with the wariness of men who had been told what to do and were measuring whether this situation matched their instructions. There was a long exchange that Eli could not hear voices carrying upward in fragments without meaning. Then the guard at the gate stepped back and Cobb rode through. He dismounted at the enclosure. He worked methodically, checking each animal against the written registry he had taken from Eli that morning, writing in his ledger without hurrying, recording every mark and every number with the thoroughness of a man who understands that the value of documentation is in its completeness. When he was finished, he rode back out through the gate past the guards and up the ridge, and his face when he reached them was different from the face he had ridden down with. Not triumphant. Something quieter than that. The face of a man who has done something overdue and is feeling the specific weight of that particular relief. All 30, he said. Brands unaltered, consistent with your registry. He looked at Eli. I have got it documented. Can you compel their return? Clara asked. With a documented theft verified brands a witness trail and a sheriff's field record. Cobb almost smiled, which was the most expression Eli had seen on his face in 3 years. Yes, I can do that. Then do it today, Clara said, before his attorneys file anything this afternoon. They were back in Coldwater Creek before noon. Eli was standing in the street outside Cobb's office when the Denver coach arrived, and he knew what it was before it stopped because there was only one kind of vehicle that traveled from Denver to Coldwater Creek in that particular style, all deliberate expense, an understated statement, built to say something without appearing to be saying it. Duncan Hargrove stepped down from the coach with the unhurried ease of a man who has never had to move quickly because the pace of events has always accommodated itself to him. He was shorter than Eli had pictured, which was the first surprise, and he was dressed with the particular restraint of a man who has enough money not to display it, obviously, which was not a surprise at all. His face was pleasant in the way of faces that have been arranged into pleasantness for so long that the arrangement has become structural. He saw Eli and walked toward him with his hand extended as though they were acquaintances meeting by chance at a county fair. Mr. Morrow, he said. His voice was warm. That was the thing Eli noticed first and kept noticing the absolute ease of the warmth practiced and deployed like a hand tool selected for a specific purpose. I have been hoping for the opportunity to speak with you directly. Eli did not take the hand. Hargrove let it drop without visible reaction. I understand there has been some confusion about livestock this morning. I want you to know that whatever occurred was without my knowledge or authorization. The men responsible were contracted laborers, not company employees. Their behavior was unacceptable, and they have been released. Contracted laborers, Eli said. Regrettably, yes. I have addressed the situation internally. The warmth did not shift. Mr. Morrow, I have been attempting to establish a productive relationship with the ranchers in this valley for over a year. I have been met with resistance at every turn, which I understand. But I genuinely believe a partnership arrangement could benefit everyone involved. The water access I need, combined with the economic development my company brings to a territory, creates value for the entire region. Mr. Hargrove, Clara's voice came from behind Eli's right shoulder, and it had the particular quality it developed when she had heard enough of something and had decided to respond to the substance rather than the surface. Hargrove looked at her and something moved through his expression, a slight adjustment, the recalibration of a man receiving new information about a situation he believed he had already fully assessed. You must be Miss Vane, he said. For the purposes of this conversation, Clara said, stepping forward to stand beside Eli rather than behind him. The distinction between my current name and my future name is not meaningful. She looked at Hargrove with the directness that had stopped being startling to Eli sometime around the second day. I have read your filings, Mr. Hargrove. Both boundary inquiries filed against this property in the past 18 months. I have read the surveyor's report you filed 4 days ago. I have read the purchase approach letter sent to the Beckett Ranch in April. She held his gaze without accommodation. And I have read 6 filings from Jefferson County, Missouri, where an identical legal template was used in 1874 and 1875 against 4 farming families, 3 of whom sold under financial and legal pressure, and 1 of whom fought the survey claim and won when a federal circuit court ruled the boundary survey methodology fraudulent. Something shifted in Hargrove's expression, barely, a tightening at the corners of his eyes that his face immediately moved to cover. Eli saw it. He was certain Clara saw it. I know which case established that precedent, Clara continued. I know which judge authored the ruling. I know which attorney argued the winning position. And I know that attorney is currently practicing in Colorado Springs, which is where I sent a telegraph this morning. He was already aware of your activities in this territory. He had been waiting for exactly this kind of contact. The street was very quiet. Winifred Calder had come out of the general store and was standing on her porch with her arms crossed and an expression that suggested she was not pretending to do anything other than listen. Hargrove looked at Clara for a long moment. The warmth was still present, but it had developed an edge beneath it. The way ice develops an edge when the temperature drops past a certain point, still smooth on the surface but capable of different things. You are a resourceful woman, he said. I am a woman who knows precisely what you are doing and has spent 3 years preparing to stop it. Clara did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Your surveyor's report will be challenged on methodology by an attorney who has argued this specific issue successfully before a federal circuit. Your boundary claim will be measured against the Jefferson County precedent. Your documented practice of filing identical legal instruments against multiple properties across multiple jurisdictions will be entered into the territorial record as evidence of coordinated fraudulent intent. She let that settle for a moment. You can still walk away from this, Mr. Hargrove. Take your survey and your attorneys and find water access somewhere that does not require the systematic destruction of families who built this valley before you knew it existed. You will save your company a significant legal expense and a considerable amount of unwanted federal attention. Hargrove looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Eli, and the shift in his gaze was itself a kind of statement. You are allowing a woman you have known for less than a week to direct your legal response to a serious property matter, he said. I am listening to someone who is right, Eli said. That is all I am doing. Hargrove studied him. That is a sentimental position for a man with a great deal at stake. You are welcome to think so. The warmth had gone out of Hargrove's face entirely now. What was beneath it was not anger, which would have been reassuring in its way, but something colder and more patient, the expression of a man revising his assessment of an obstacle without abandoning his intention to remove it. I have been in this territory for 2 years, Hargrove said. I have relationships with territorial judges, with county surveyors, with commercial interests in every town between here and Denver. Whatever your associate communicated to Colorado Springs this morning will not arrive before my attorneys file their formal response to the sheriff's interference today. Once that process is in motion, it has a momentum that one rancher and one clever woman are not positioned to stop. He said it without heat. That was what made it land the way it landed. He walked back to his coach and climbed in, and the driver moved the horses out of Coldwater Creek at a pace that was itself a kind of statement, unhurried, already thinking about something else. Eli stood in the street and felt the ground under his feet, the way you feel it after an earthquake, still solid, but no longer something you trust without thinking about it. Hargrove was not wrong about the momentum. 18 months of carefully constructed legal architecture did not collapse because a county sheriff had documented a theft. It absorbed that documentation and continued. He is right about the momentum, Eli said. About the momentum, Clara said. Not about what stops it. She turned to face him, and her voice was steady, in the way it was steady when she had already looked at the difficult thing and was standing on the other side of it. Look at me, Eli. He looked at her. The family in Jefferson County that won. Do you remember what I told you about them? They won before the company could bury the case in territorial procedure. They won because they moved fast, and they moved with documentation that could not be reinterpreted. They won because they had one specific thing that Hargrove did not account for. She held his gaze, a direct witness to his orders. Someone inside the operation who heard the instructions given and was willing to repeat them under oath. Eli went still. Pete Landis, Clara said. Hargrove used the word unacceptable about him in a public street this morning in front of a sheriff. A man does not do that about someone he plans to protect. Pete Landis grew up in this valley and has a mother who still lives 3 miles east of town. He is sitting somewhere right now, understanding that he has been made into evidence that will be discarded when it is no longer convenient. She paused. That is a man with something to say and a reason to say it. Eli looked at her for a moment. Then he turned to Cress, who had been standing nearby with his hat in his hand, in the expression of a man tracking a conversation he is finding more useful than he expected. You know Pete Landis, Eli said. Since he was 12 years old, Cress said. He is not a bad man. Got himself pointed in a wrong direction because the money was good, and he did not ask the questions he should have asked. Cress turned his hat in his hands. He will be at his mother's place. Eli made the decision before he finished the sentence. I will go alone, he said. Clara looked at him. He needs to hear it from another man, Eli said. Not from a lawyer, not from someone explaining consequences to him. From another man who has been working against something bigger than himself and has run out of the option of pretending it will resolve without a choice. He looked at Clara. Is that right? She held his gaze for a moment with the assessing attention that saw clearly. Then she nodded once. Yes, she said. That is right. Eli rode to the Landis place alone. Pete Landis was on the porch when Eli arrived, sitting in a chair with his hat on his knee, and the specific look of a young man in the process of understanding something about himself that he would have preferred not to understand. He was 28 years old, and he looked younger in the way people look younger when something has removed the confidence that usually does the work of appearing older. He looked up when Eli rode in and made no move to rise or reach for anything. He just looked. Eli dismounted and tied his horse and walked to the foot of the porch steps and stood there. Pete, he said. Mr. Morrow, Pete said. His voice was steady, but there was effort in the steadiness. Eli looked at him for a moment without speaking. He thought about what Clara had said about not making it about consequences or about persuasion, about speaking to a man as a man. Hargrove used the word unacceptable about you in a public street this morning, Eli said, in front of a sheriff. Made sure everyone in Coldwater Creek heard it. A man does not do that about someone he plans to stand behind. That tells you something about what you are worth to him now that you have served your purpose. Pete was quiet. I am not here to offer you something, Eli said. I am not here to explain what happens to you if you do not help me. I am here because you grew up in this valley and your mother still lives in it, and I think you understand what Hargrove is doing to every family in it, including yours. He paused. I am asking you if you heard him give the orders, directly, in his own words. Pete looked at his hat for a long moment. In his office, Pete said finally, 3 weeks ago, me and 2 others, he laid it out clear as anything. He looked up, said the ranchers would fold, said they always did, said the ones who did not fold would run out of money and it would amount to the same thing. His jaw worked. Said it like he was talking about weather, like it was not people he was discussing. Will you say that to a territorial judge, Eli said. Pete was quiet for a long time, the kind of quiet that is not uncertainty, but the last private moment before a decision becomes irreversible. Yes, sir, he said. I will. Eli rode back to town with Pete Landis beside him, and the afternoon light was going long and gold across the snow. When they arrived at Cobb's office, where Claire and Cress were waiting, alongside a man Eli did not recognize, who was standing in the street reading from a folder with the absolute focus of someone for whom reading a legal document is not a task, but a form of concentration. Silas Reed had come off the afternoon stage looking like a man who had slept in his coat and found the experience adequate. He was 65 years old, with a face that had been remade by 3 decades of territorial courtrooms into something that communicated competence before he opened his mouth. He carried 1 bag and a leather case worn smooth at every corner. He had already been on the morning stage from Colorado Springs when Clara's telegraph arrived at his office because he had been following Hargrove's activities in the Colorado Territory for 8 months and had been waiting for someone in this valley to make exactly this kind of contact. His associate had wired him on the road, and he had not slowed down. He shook Eli's hand with the grip of a man who has learned what a handshake tells you. Then he looked at Clara, and she handed him the folder she had been building since before dawn. 12 pages of timeline compass documentation, Cobb's filed reports, the copy of Hargrove's survey petition with the matching language annotated in her precise hand. Reed had read it standing in the street outside the stage depot, and nobody had spoken while he did it. When he finished, he closed the folder and looked at Clara. "You cited the Whitmore ruling in your telegraph," he said. "The methodology match is within 2%, she said. I cross-referenced Hargrove's survey calculations against the technique the circuit court ruled fraudulent in Whitmore. The variance is identical." Reed studied her for a moment. "Who taught you property law?" "I taught myself," Clara said, "in the county library in St. Louis over 3 months, because someone had to." Reed nodded once with the economy of a man who does not use gestures carelessly. "I took this case when you cited Whitmore in a telegraph from a cattle town," he said. "Now show me your witness." Pete Landis gave his formal statement the following morning, seated at the table in Winifred Calder's back room, which Winifred had offered, without being asked, and refused to be thanked for. The county clerk notarized it. Cress Dunbar and Roy Sutton witnessed it. Pete's voice shook for the first 10 minutes and then steadied, and by the end of it, he had placed Hargrove in direct command of every major incident across the valley for 8 months, named 4 of Hargrove's employees by full name, and described the meeting in Hargrove's private office with the word-for-word precision of a man who had been replaying it in his head since the moment he understood what he had agreed to participate in. Reed wrote it down. Clara wrote it down. They sat side by side at the table and compared their records and resolved every discrepancy until the statement was seamless. On the 3rd day, Hargrove's attorneys filed an injunction to block Cobb's cattle recovery order, and a cold quiet came into the room while Reed read through it carefully, making notations in the margin with a pencil he held loosely, the way experienced people hold tools they have used long enough not to think about. He looked up. "This injunction is premised on the validity of the boundary survey," he said. "We have the Whitmore precedent establishing that the specific methodology used in that survey is fraudulent. The injunction defeats itself. We respond tomorrow morning." Eli looked at Clara across the table. She was looking at Reed's margin notations with the focused attention she brought to everything she read. "There is something else," Reed said. He set down his pencil and folded his hands on the table with the deliberateness of a man who has been holding something back until the right moment. "I have been building a federal filing since the day I read Miss Vane's folder. The pattern of identical instruments across multiple properties in multiple jurisdictions constitutes coordinated land fraud under federal statute. I have not told either of you this until now, because I needed every action in this case to be genuine and uninfluenced by knowledge of the larger proceeding." He looked at them both steadily. "I am telling you now because the filing goes to the circuit court tomorrow concurrent with our response to the injunction. Hargrove's attorneys will not see it coming." Eli sat with that for a moment. "How long have you been planning this?" he said. "Since page 4 of the folder," Reed said, and for the first time since he had stepped off the stage, he looked something close to satisfied, which on his particular face was a considerable expression. The night before the hearing, Eli and Clara were alone in the kitchen. The fire was going in the stove, and the snow was falling again outside, soft and steady, the kind that settles rather than drives. Clara was at the table with her notebook open, but she was not writing, which was the first time Eli had seen her sit with an open notebook without writing in it. Her hands were flat on the table, and she was looking at something that was not in the room. Eli poured 2 cups of coffee and sat across from her and set 1 cup within her reach. "Let yourself believe it is going to hold," he said. She looked at him. "I am not built for believing things before they are certain." "I know." He put his hand over hers on the table. "Neither am I, but we built something solid and Reed is carrying it, and Pete Landis said what he said, and it is documented 6 different ways." He held her gaze. "It is going to hold." She looked at his hand over hers. Then she looked at him with the dark eyes that saw clearly and did not look away from what they saw. "I love you," she said. She said it the way she said everything directly and without decoration, without preamble or softening. "I have been thinking it for 4 days, and I am tired of carrying it by myself." Eli felt the words land in his chest and stay there with the particular permanence of things that are simply true. "I know," he said. "I have too, since about the second morning when I came out and found my property map covered in pencil marks before I was awake enough to ask permission." The corner of her mouth moved. "That is not a romantic origin story. It is an honest one," he said. She turned her hand under his and held it. "Eli, I need you to know something. Tell me. I have spent 3 years being very careful about what I allow myself to trust," she said. "Not because I'm afraid of being wrong, because I know what it costs when the trust is misplaced, and the person it was placed in was showing you what you wanted to see rather than what they were." She looked at him steadily. "I am not afraid of you. I am not afraid of this. But I need you to know that I am trusting you with something I have not trusted anyone with since Saint. Lewis and I need you to understand the weight of that." "I understand it," Eli said. "Do you?" "I lost a child," he said. It was the first time he had said his son's name to her, and he felt it move through him, the way it always moved through him, the specific ache of a word that has been carried so long it has worn a groove in everything it touches. His name was Noah. I watched my wife look at what remained of our life together and decide she could not continue in it. I spent 7 years convincing myself that I was fine alone, because the alternative was admitting that I was not fine and that I did not know how to fix it. He held her gaze. "I know the weight of what you are trusting me with because I am trusting you with the same weight. All of it. Not halfway." She was very still for a moment. Then she came around the table and he stood up and she put her hand flat on his chest, right over the place where the cold had lived for 7 years, and looked up at him with the eyes that saw everything and did not look away from what they found there. "I am not leaving," she said. "Whatever comes tomorrow, whatever comes after, I am not leaving." He put his hand over hers. "I know," he said. "I stopped being afraid of that around day 3. She almost smiled. "Only 3 days. I was being stubborn for one of them." She did laugh then, a real laugh, brief and unguarded, the laugh of someone surprised by their own amusement. And it was the best sound Eli had heard in 7 years. And he held on to it after it was gone, the way you hold on to something you did not expect to be given and are not going to waste. The hearing was held on the second Thursday of November in the Coldwater Creek County Courthouse, a room that had been built for smaller purposes and was learning about its own limitations. Every rancher from the valley had come. Their wives had come. Roy Sutton sat with Harlan Beckett and the Beaumont brothers in the second row, all of them in their best coats, carrying the serious expressions of men who understood that the day was one of the days that mattered. Winifred Calder was in the front row with her arms crossed and her best hat and an expression that dared anyone present to try anything she would not approve of. Cress Dunbar stood along the wall with his arms folded, watching everything with the patient attention of a man who has seen enough to know when something important is happening and is making sure he does not miss it. Sheriff Cobb sat near the back. He had filed every document Reed had required and had signed everything placed before him and had been doing his job with a consistency that Eli suspected had something to do with the experience of being held to a standard he had set for himself long ago and let drift in being reminded by someone who treated the standard as obvious rather than aspirational. Hargrove sat at the opposing table with 2 attorneys in the contained stillness of a man who has not yet revised his expectation of winning. Reed presented the case in 3 hours. He was methodical and precise, building from the foundation of Clara's documented timeline through the compass readings in the sheriff's field record and the survey methodology comparison, and finally to Pete Landis's statement, which he read into the record in full in the careful, neutral voice of an attorney who knows that the most powerful testimony requires no assistance from the person delivering it. When he read the line about ranchers always folding about the ones who did not fold running out of money, and it amounting to the same thing, the room went so quiet that Eli could hear the clerk's pen moving across the record page. Clara was called to testify, and she walked to the stand with the straight-back composure that Eli knew by now was not performance, but simply how she moved when she knew where she was going. Hargrove's lead attorney tried 3 approaches in sequence. the St. Louis defamation filing that had been dismissed in 2 weeks, her lack of formal legal training, the amateur reliability of compass bearings taken by lantern light at 2 in the morning. She answered each question in the same clear level voice she used for everything else. The voice she used to discuss feed schedules and stone bruises and water trough cracks. Precise, unadorned, without the slight defensive elevation that tells a questioner they have found something worth pressing on. On the third failed approach, the attorney sat down and did not try again. Eli sat and watched her. He watched the person who had stepped off a stage 9 days ago into a town that did not know her, into a situation she had recognized before he had recognized it himself, into a fight she had not been required to take on and had taken on anyway. He watched her hold her ground under questioning from a man who was paid to find the crack in whatever she presented, and he watched her give him nothing to work with, not because she was without vulnerability, but because the truth requires no maintenance, and she was telling it. He thought about Noah, about Margaret, about 7 years of doing what needed doing and calling the endurance of it something it was not. He thought about the morning Clara had found his property map and spread it on his table and started turning it into something useful before the sun came up. The judge called a recess, and the room broke into sound weeks of held tension, releasing at once into conversation and movement. Eli found Clara at the window and stood beside her without speaking for a moment. "He mentioned Warren Ashby," Eli said. "I knew he would. You were ready for it." "I am always ready for it," she said. "It still lands." She turned from the window to look at him. "I do not know how to make it not land. I am not sure I should try." "You do not stop," Eli said. "That is what matters. It lands and you do not stop." She looked at him with the eyes that saw clearly. Then she reached up and straightened his collar with the small, natural gesture of a person who has been doing a thing long enough not to think about it, and the ease of it moved through Eli like something warm that had been cold for a long time and was remembering what it was supposed to feel like. They went back into the courtroom. The judge ruled before 4 o'clock. Hargrove's boundary survey was invalidated on methodology consistent with the Whitmore precedent. The 2 preliminary filings were struck from the territorial record as elements of a documented pattern of coordinated fraudulent legal action. Hargrove Mining was ordered to return the 30 head of cattle to pay restitution for documented property damage across 5 ranches and to cease all operations within 20 miles of Coldwater Creek, pending a federal investigation into coordinated land fraud across multiple jurisdictions. The federal filing had been entered that morning. Reed had built toward it from the first day he read Clara's folder, and he had moved it quietly and completely, and Hargrove's attorneys had not seen it coming until the judge read it from the bench. And the expression on the lead attorney's face in that moment was the expression of a man recalculating the size of something he had not looked at carefully enough. The room erupted. Eli sat still in the noise and felt it as though from a slight distance, all that sound of relief and release and weeks of pressure finally resolving into something the body could express. He felt Clara's hand find his under the table, and he held it and did not say anything and did not need to. Hargrove left without speaking. At the door, he turned and looked across the room at Eli, and the expression on his face was not rage and not humiliation, but the cold, specific recognition of a man who has encountered something he failed to calculate and is filing it carefully for future reference. The expression of a man who is not done, only pausing. Eli held his gaze. He held it long enough to make clear that he understood what the expression meant and that he was not afraid of it. Hargrove turned and walked out. The gathering that followed had the quality of something that could not have been planned, could not have been organized, because it arose from something that organization cannot produce, which is the specific relief of people who have been separately afraid for a long time, discovering at the same moment that they were never alone. Winifred Calder produced a bottle from somewhere inside her coat, and the back room of her general store became for one evening the social center of Coldwater Creek, full of ranchers and their families who had been isolated by the same strategy for 18 months and were finding in the discovery of their shared story something that Hargrove had spent 2 years methodically removing from this valley, which was the particular strength of people who know they are not the only ones standing. Roy Sutton held Clara's hand for a long time when he shook it, and did not say much, which from Roy was the equivalent of a considerable speech. Harlan Beckett stood near the back with a glass of whiskey and the look of a man relearning the size of his world, recalculating the dimensions of something he had believed was smaller than it was. Cress found Eli near the wall and stood beside him the way Cress stood beside everything solid and without ceremony. "She did that," Cress said. "She did," Eli said. "And so did you, and Cobb, and Pete Landis, and Roy, and Harlan. She made it possible for the rest of us to do it," Cress said, which was a longer observation than Cress usually made, and landed with the weight that simple, true things land with when they are said by people who do not say things unless they mean them. Eli received it as what it was. Pete Landis found Eli before the evening ended. He stood straight and looked Eli in the eye and did not look away from it, which was the right thing to do. "I know I do not have a standing to ask for much," Pete said, "but I need work, real work. Hargrove is finished in this valley, and the men who worked for him are going to have a hard time finding anything." He paused. "I am not asking you to trust me all at once. I am asking for a chance to earn it." Eli looked at him. He thought about a woman who had asked him for something very similar in a different way, on a wagon bench on a road he had driven alone for 7 years. He thought about what it had cost him to grant it and what it had given back, and the accounting was not close. "Monday morning," he said, 6 o'clock. Pete nodded once and did not say more, which was also the right thing. They rode home under a sky full of stars, the trail pale in the darkness, the mountains black and permanent against a sky that had gone deep and clear in the way that Colorado skies go clear after weather, as though they are showing you what they are capable of when nothing is in the way. Eli rode and Clara rode, and the space between them was quiet in the best way, the way that does not need filling because it already contains everything that needs to be in it. "Reed's offer," Eli said. "Formal training in Denver. 3 people who would take you immediately." "I know what the offer was," she said. "If that is what you want, I will manage here. I have been managing alone for 7 years." Clara rode for a moment. The horses moved easy on the packed snow, their breath making small clouds in the cold air. "What I want is here," she said. "This valley needs someone who knows how to fight this kind of thing the next time it arrives. And it will arrive again. Not Hargrove specifically, but the thing Hargrove represents does not disappear because one man loses in one courthouse." She looked at him across the space between their horses. She looked at him across some. "I want to be here when it does, with you. That is what I want clearly and without reservation." Eli absorbed that. He thought about all the things he had wanted clearly and without reservation that he had talked himself out of over 7 years by applying the wrong kind of caution to them, by confusing the discipline of endurance with the discipline of living. "All right," he said, "then that is what we do." She reached across the distance between the horses, and he took her hand, and they rode that way through the cold Colorado night, the ranch appearing gradually around the last curve of the trail, the window putting a pale square of light out into the darkness, warm and specific and waiting. 3 weeks later, on a Thursday morning in the county clerk's office in Coldwater Creek, with Cress Dunbar as witness, and Winifred Calder in her finest hat, demonstrating with absolute commitment that she was not crying, and Roy Sutton at the back making no such demonstration and having no intention of starting Eli Morrow, and Clara Vane stood before the county judge. The judge asked Eli if he would take this woman as his wife. "Without a single reservation," Eli said. It was not the required phrasing. It was the honest one, and he had been a man who valued honesty over convention long enough to know the difference. The judge asked Clara if she would take this man. "I already have," she said. "But yes." Winifred Calder produced a handkerchief from somewhere inside her coat and applied it with great dignity and complete ineffectiveness. Cress studied the ceiling with careful attention. Roy Sutton wept without apology and without any apparent intention of stopping, and would later tell anyone who asked that he had something in both eyes simultaneously which satisfied no one. On the road home, with their breath-making small clouds in the cold, and the mountains holding the last of the afternoon light on their high faces turning gold, in the way that things turn gold when the light is almost gone, and making the most of what remains, Eli rode and thought. He thought about the morning 7 years ago when he had understood that he was going to be alone for a long time and had decided that alone was something a man could build a life around if he was careful enough about it. He had been wrong about that, not entirely wrong. He had built something real and hard and worth defending, something that had required everything he had to build and more to keep. But alone had not been a foundation. It had been what remained after the foundation had been taken from him, and he had mistaken the remainder for the structure and had spent 7 years maintaining the remainder and calling it enough. It had not been enough. He knew that now with the specific clarity that only comes from having the thing you were missing and being able to feel the shape of the absence it filled. Clara rode beside him, and the silence between them was the silence of people who have already said the important things and are resting in the space that creates the good silence, the earned silence, the silence that is not empty but full of everything that has been said and everything that will be. Snow tomorrow, she said. Most likely, he said. Good. She looked at the mountains where the light was going gold on the snow, where the peaks held the last of the day, the way they held everything with the patience of things that have been here longer than any difficulty brought to their feet and will be here after it is resolved. We will have work to do. The ranch came around the last turn in the trail, the barn dark against the evening sky. The house small and square with the window lit from inside where the stove was going, and the rooms were warm, and the two of them were coming home to it together, which was a thing that had not been true of that window's light for 7 years, and was true of it now and would be true of it from this night forward. Eli Morrow rode toward the light. He had ridden this last stretch of trail 1,000 times in 7 years, always in the same direction, always returning to the same thing, always with the specific quality of a man going back to something rather than forward to something. The difference between enduring and living being exactly that, the direction you are facing when you move. He was facing forward now. He touched his heels lightly to his horse and rode toward the light and toward the woman riding beside him and toward everything that was waiting inside that small square house that had been too quiet for too long. And he did not look back at the 7 years behind him. Not because they had not mattered, but because what was ahead of him mattered more. And a man only has so much attention, and he intended to put all of his where it would do the most good. The horses came into the yard, and their breath made clouds in the cold night air. And the stars above the Rockies were the kind of stars you only see when the air is clean and cold, and the sky has decided to show you everything it has. Clara swung down from her saddle, and he swung down from his, and they stood in the yard of the ranch he had built out of loss and stubbornness and 7 years of refusing to quit. And she looked at him with the dark eyes that saw clearly, and he looked at her with the eyes of a man who has finally stopped being afraid of what he sees when he looks too directly at the things he wants. And neither of them said anything because there was nothing left to say that had not already been said or that could not wait until morning. He took her hand. They went inside.